Hey, well, hi there. Good morning. No, good afternoon. Oh, that's how thrown I am. Yes, so first of all, starting with a bit of an apology. This morning we tried to go live with Storyhouse Church from St. Michael's School, and last week we didn't attempt that because we knew there'd be all kinds of other things to deal with, and we wouldn't be able to do it well. We tried it this week, and it was apparently very patchy and poor, and then it just cut out altogether, which is no good. So massive apologies for those of you who wanted to see Storyhouse Church this morning, couldn't join us for it. We're going to keep working on that one, but just kind of forgive our mess as we work through all of that kind of stuff. We're brand new to meeting in the school and having church there. So yeah, we're discovering all kinds of issues as we go along. But it's fun, it's going really well, it's great. You're very welcome to join us in person, but for those of you who are joining at home, we do apologise that was going to be basically 2 weeks without Storyhouse Church online. So what I'm going to do instead from this morning is I'm just going to share the message again that we shared together this morning so that you can catch up with what it is we've been looking at and talking about. So thanks for joining me. What we're doing at Storyhouse Church is we are going through this book here called Whole Life, Whole Bible. And what it is kind of 50 readings from the start to the end of the Bible. So if you want to join us in it, don't freak out and worry. You don't have to read the whole Bible before Christmas. It's going to be 50 readings before Christmas, or 5 a week. And we've got a little schedule that we're all following. So 5 readings each week, starting tomorrow. Gives you a couple of days grace to forget and catch up and all that kind of thing, so that by Christmas we would have gone through the whole story of the Bible from Genesis through to Revelation. And today we are starting at the start. We are starting at Genesis, and I'm doing this live. So if you've got any questions or comments or anything like that, do give me a shout out, say hello, ask those questions. That would be really great. Lovely to have you with us. And if you're watching again later, same, just leave a comment. That's always good for other people. It's good for us to get feedback as well. So let us start this whole story and journey of the Bible in Genesis chapter 1, verse 26. So right at the start. God said, "Let us make man in our image, in our likeness, and let them rule over the fish of the sea and over the birds of the air, over the livestock, over all the earth, and over all the creatures that move along the ground." So God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created him. Male and female, he created them. God blessed them and said to them, "Be fruitful and increase in number. Fill the earth and subdue it. Rule over the fish of the sea and the birds of the air and over every living creature that moves on the ground." Then God said, "I give you every seed-bearing plant on the face of the whole earth, and every tree that has fruit with seed in it. They will be yours for food. And to all the beasts of the earth, and all the birds of the air, and all the creatures that move on the ground, everything that has the breath of life in it, I give every green plant for food." And it was so. God saw all that he made, and it was very good. And there was evening, and there was morning, the 6th day. And so the heavens and the earth were completed in all their vast array. By the 7th day, God had finished the work he had been doing. So on the 7th day, he rested from all his work. And God blessed the 7th day and made it holy, because on it he rested from all the work of creating that he had done. So we were chatting to a friend of ours online yesterday. Mike lives over in Denver and has been really helpful in because he's also set up a church, and he did it a while ago and was able to talk us through all the highs and lows and the pitfalls of doing something like starting a church, which was really good. And he commented that when I was preaching a couple of weeks ago, I was much more animated than normal. And, you know, we can put some of that down to the fact that I'd been to see Respect, the Aretha Franklin film, and I'd felt kind of shamed as a kind of white Anglican at being a bit too straight-laced and not enough filled with the Spirit and moving compared to the Black Pentecostal churches over in America. But to be honest, the main reason I was so animated was because I just had 2 weeks holiday, and it had been a long time since I've had 2 whole blessed amazing weeks of holiday. And so I was rested and refreshed in kind of all kinds of ways, and some of that was just the effect of being on holiday, of being in a hot tub in the sun with a cold beer and enjoying that, which was amazing. But some of it was also, whilst I was there, my prayer times are normally 10, maybe 15 minutes, and usually a bit rushed because I need to get on with the day, sometimes while walking the dog, so I'm a bit distracted and all that kind of thing. But whilst I was away, my kind of rushed 15 minutes in the morning suddenly started to stretch out because I had nowhere else to go and nothing to do. And so it started to become a bit more leisurely. And then I started to pray a bit deeper and sharing more of what was going on in my own life with God, and started healing some stuff and processing some emotions, and then eventually just enjoying sitting and being with God because I had nowhere else to go. And so my prayer time went from 15 to 20 to 30 to 45 to an hour long prayer time by the end of the holiday, and I was really loving it in a way that I never did. And so, of course, having had this amazing prayer experience and having been away with God and enjoying all of that, you can imagine coming home with the enthusiasm to keep that going. And did I keep it going? I did not. Give it a couple of days and real life came sweeping back in, and the pressures and the need to be here and need to do that, and I'm still exhausted from the day before, started to creep in and take away that time of prayer and chipped away until it eventually fell back to that 10-15 minute rush in the morning. And I'm sure you must have experienced something like that yourself, where you want to live this better life. You want to have better priorities. You want to spend your time in better ways. You don't want to be exhausted and rushed all the time, and yet no matter how hard you try, you seem to fall back into these old patterns. We want to live a good life. We don't want to be exhausted and rushed and not have enough time for the things that really matter. We don't want to be tired and worn down, and yet here we are. We always seem to end up going back down that path. And by starting this study, Whole Life, Whole Bible, at Genesis, what we're doing is we're going back to the blueprint, back to the way that not just we were made, but everything was made, and our part within everything, within the whole universe. And what we discover is a God who is creating things in an order. Things start off with nothingness and chaos, and out of that, God creates and then separates and gives things and animals their places and their order within creation. He starts populating all these spaces like the sky and the sea and the land with animals, and then eventually with us. And each thing has its place within this order. God creates a world of order, and we have our place within it. And one of my favorite definitions of mental health is dedication to reality. I love that definition of mental health because it says someone who is doing well knows exactly what they're about, what's going on within themselves. They're self-aware. They understand other people, they understand the world, and they're quite happy to deal with reality as it comes to them. They don't have to escape, they don't have to pretend otherwise. They know how to deal with the world as it is. And so in going back to this blueprint of how the universe was created and how we were created, we're going back to that blueprint to see how is it that we should work. And what's interesting is, from this point forward, anytime God's people want to live well, they end up in some way or another trying to kind of recreate the Garden of Eden, trying to recreate these conditions, find their place within the order again. And now for sure, we can't go back to that place of innocence. There is no walking backwards into a perfect world again. But there is something about finding our proper place and how we're supposed to work as it's shown right here in Genesis that does help. So, for example, the nation of Israel, rescued from slavery in Egypt, through the Red Sea, through a miracle, they are created and liberated as a people. And what's one of the first things that God gets them to work at? Is building a mobile temple, a tabernacle, a place where God's presence will dwell. And it's a very visual and a very practical way of saying God is at the center of our community. And what I mean by that was they were walking through this wilderness. And in the middle of it, they had this mobile tent, massive thing, which was essentially an elaborate church. And the whole nation was divided into 12 tribes. And those 12 tribes would camp around the outskirts of this tabernacle, this tent temple. And so their whole lives were literally physically orientated around God. They get their own land. One of the early projects is to build a temple, the place of worship, to make the tabernacle permanent. And so they do that. And the temple and Jerusalem become the center of national identity, the place of worship where God dwells. And then comes exile, where they are taken away from Jerusalem, forcibly moved into other nations, where they are, the powers that be, Babylon, try to assimilate their culture, try to get them to forget God, forget home, and take on the ways of Babylon instead. And so in that place, we read the stories of people like Daniel, where they have to be even more deliberate about how they live their lives to orientate themselves towards God again. And we get this glimpse of Daniel's private prayer life that gets him in trouble, actually, because he prays 3 times a day, and he does it with his window open facing Jerusalem. He's like, even though I'm in this distant land, even though everything is against my identity as someone who belongs to God, I am going to orientate myself towards God and his presence. I'm going to face Jerusalem, the place of worship, and remember my God and pray to my God. And then we come to the time of Jesus and the time of the church. And we are told that God's Spirit lives amongst his people, that the community itself is kind of like the new temple. And so life becomes orientated around that community, because that's where God's presence is, both in and between people, kind of existing almost within the relationships itself. And so what God's people have always done throughout history is try and structure their lives and orientate it with God at the center, the one who created all things, to, in some kind of sense, reconstruct Eden in a way, to try and get back to our original design. And one of the most influential people to do that in European history was a guy called Saint Benedict. And the rule of Saint Benedict has become the basis for a lot of communities, both like full-on monastic communities, people who live in monastic communities, and those inspired by them who live everyday lives but want to structure their lives around it. Even got a friend from college who I trained with set up one of these monastic communities down in London, and is still going today. People take a year out to live intensely this rule amongst one another. And what Benedict came up with, and it's a longish rule, it's not massive, it's longish, you can find it online, but it comes down to 5 practices: to pray, to work, to study, to practice hospitality, and to practice renewal or rest. What's interesting about those 5 is you will find them all in Genesis 1 and 2, in the original blueprint, and how we were designed to function. See, these things are practical as much as anything else. There is a way that we are meant to work, and when those conditions are present, we do really well, we flourish, and when they're absent, we don't do well. So at the start of this study, we're talking about how it is that we function well, and how actually something as mundane as turning up to church each week, or the midweek study, or doing a Bible study every day like this, or setting aside time to spend with friends and family, is so significant for our spiritual health, and it's how we live well, and it's how we thrive. And the thing is, if you don't set aside this time, if you don't decide the structure by which you will live your life, someone else will do it for you. There are millions and millions of pounds out there in marketing agencies' hands that corporations are spending to get them to decide how you spend your spare time. And yes, there are spiritual forces out there as well, influencing us and helping us to decide how to spend our time. If we don't make these kind of deliberate decisions, they will be made for us by people who don't necessarily have our best interests at heart. So that's what we're looking at. We're looking at structuring our lives around God and what that practically looks like. And there's a guy called Pete Scazzero. He wrote this book, Emotionally Healthy Spirituality. It's a really good book, and some other books like it. And he's got a great podcast. If you want to know about all these things like spiritual practices and how to have emotional health as a Christian, really recommend his stuff. Really helpful. And he simplifies the rule of Benedict down to 4. Simply prayer, rest, work, and relationships. And when we're doing those 4 well and they're in balance in our life, then we're generally healthy. And again, those 4 you will find in Genesis. So prayer, and by prayer, I don't just mean asking God for stuff. I'm talking about that whole thing of connecting with God, the relationship we enjoy with God, worship, all of it. That thing is one of the things that we find described in Genesis 1-2. This image of human beings having this intimate relationship with God, enjoying time with God, walking in the garden with God in an unbroken, relaxed, easy, leisurely, healthy relationship. And when we're doing well, we have that kind of relationship with God that is close, where we know one another. It's unforced, it's leisurely, and it's regular. And so the practices of prayer and worship are an essential part to a human being flourishing and doing well. And, we've seen some people come and go, even in our short lifespan as a church. We've been around for 2-3 years. And even in that time, we've seen people come and go. And one of the main reasons you see some people give Christianity a go and then give up on it is because they were never really about centering their lives on God. They were about fixing something in their lives or sensing something was missing and thinking, like everything else in the world, you could have just a bit of it and it would fix it or make you feel better. But, essentially have God as a hobby or as a side hustle or as a thing over there, not the central organizing principle of your life. And unless God becomes the single most important thing in your life, unless following Jesus defines everything else you do in your life, it will not work. It's as simple as that. You will find yourself horribly conflicted and it just will not work for you. But when we center our lives around God and when we give our lives away to that, we actually find ourselves getting our lives back. We find ourselves flourishing. Jesus put this really simply. He said, if you lose your life for his sake, you will end up finding it. But if you try and live your own life on your own terms, you'll end up eventually losing your life, your soul, who you are. So that's prayer. Then there's work. Some people are fascinated to discover that work was a part of God's design for us, that it was there before everything went wrong, that before human beings rebelled and the whole world got corrupted, which we'll move on to next week, work was there. We were meant to work. And you can see it really obviously when someone retires and they just can't cope with it and they go a bit wrong, or they just play crazy amounts of golf, because we're meant to do things in the world. We're meant to contribute to the world, to make it a better place. It's part of who we are. And when we're not doing that, we sense it and we find unhealthy outlets for that angst. Retirement's a bit of a myth. It was always meant to be this short period at the end of your life where you physically couldn't do much at all anymore. It was not meant to be the bit that your whole life built up to, because we're meant to work. And I mean that in the broadest sense, not just doing a 9-to-5 kind of a job, but actually contributing to the flourishing of the world. Us human beings have pretty much wrecked the earth over the last couple of 100 years. And so this kind of idea has kind of steadily grown up that if we weren't around, the world would be better. So maybe the best thing human beings can do is stay out of the world's way and, leave very light traces. But that's not the image of the Bible. The image of the Bible starts in this garden that everything's great, but human beings are supposed to practice dominion or subject the earth, as some translations put it. That is, we're kind of the rangers or the zookeepers of the world. We're the ones who are supposed to rule over it and make sure it's doing well and contribute to its flourishing. And the end of the Bible is not a garden. It's not that return to innocence, but it's a garden city. It's this city with trees and rivers in it. It's a place that is developed in which human beings have moved things forward and rule over it well, and in which everything's doing well. And so when we talk about work in a rhythm of life, we're not just talking about toil, as the Bible calls it, just hard work, but meaningful work. The important thing that God has gifted you to do, that no one else can do. The thing that you're passionate about that other people aren't passionate about. We're really aware as a church that we need people with different gifts and different passions. And what's interesting is, as we pray for people who are good at those different things, that God tends to prod people, wake them up to it. And maybe you're sensing that yourself. We needed help with this, and God prodded someone to help out with that. Someone's really really capable at that, and it's exactly what we needed. We've had that time and time again throughout our church. I'm being deliberately vague so I don't single people out and isolate others, but we only exist because people chip in with their unique skills and passions, and that's just a small microcosm of the whole of life. And Jesus was really focused around work. He was really clear where his responsibilities started and where they ended, and he wouldn't pick up work that was not his to do. But he was very clear that he had work to do, that God had given him work to do. His Father in heaven had given him work to do, and he was going to do it. But he was not going to do the work that was not his work to do either. And then relationships. So there's one thing in Genesis 1-2 that is described as not good. So God creates plant life, animal life, fish and birds, stars in the sky, separates the waters from the land, and all of it is described as good. It's good, it's good, it's good, it's very good. But then we find Adam on his own, a solo human being, and it is described as not good. We were not meant to live in isolation. We do not do well when we are separated from other human beings. We need one another. This whole myth that we should define ourselves and we stand strong on our own and follow our own desires and everyone else should fall in line with that leaves us isolated and broken and mentally unwell. We were meant to grow and live in connection to other people. We need high quality relationships in our lives, and not 1,000 Facebook friends, like a handful of good friends. The kind of level of relationship that we can sustain, where you can look someone in the eye and share deep conversations and make food for each other when you're down. That kind of relationship. And then the final practice is restoration or rest or renewal. And this in creation is day 7. So days 1-6, God is making stuff, and it's good, he's making, it's good. And then it says day 7, he rests from all the work that he was doing. He takes a rest. God takes a rest. If you've ever felt like, you couldn't take a day off in the week, literally the God who made the universe was able to take a day off. You can take a day off. And again, this isn't just a day off. A day off in a lot of ways is a terrible term for it, because the Bible calls it Sabbath, which is a rest from work. It's a day of enjoyment and prayer. It is a day of fun. It's a day of doing all those things that are brilliant and enjoyable just for their own sake. It's the day where you don't have to be productive, where you simply just be, and you do good things, and you be with the people that you love, and you celebrate life, and you pray and you worship, and that is it. That's all it is about, is a day where you just are. And God built this so much into the way that the world works that everything in God's economy got a rest. So if you look at the rules, which sometimes befuddle us, of Israel, certain things had to get rested every 7. So fields got a rest every 7 years. Cattle got a rest even on the Sabbath day. Everything got a rest. So interestingly, God is against something like intensive farming and is for giving the land a rest, 1 in 7. Really interesting. Everything should rest, not just us. And it's really in vogue and really popular right now, and Christians have picked up on this idea of rewilding, which is when we give farmed or intensively gardened areas of land a rest and just let things go back to seed and back to nature, all kinds of surprising life springs out of it. And that's an image of Sabbath. 1 day in 7, 1 day a week, where we're not producing, we're not doing, we simply are, and all kinds of surprising life springs out of that practice. So there's all kinds of obstacles to living this kind of well-balanced life, of having work and rest and relationship and prayer in it. One is when it's out of balance. When there's just too much of any one of these things. So there was like a study that's just come out a few weeks ago that found that people needed, I think it was somewhere between 2 and 5 hours free time a day. If they got less than that, their well-being went down. If they got more than that, their well-being went down, which is really interesting. Too much free time is not good for us. It comes back to the work thing again. So when things are out of balance and out of whack, that's one of the things. But I actually think our biggest issue is we're having junk versions of all of these things. And what I mean by that is that actually our world is full of cheap imitations of all of this. So I asked Anne, who comes to our church, what she was enjoying about a book called The Ruthless Elimination of Hurry, written by John Mark Comer. It's a really good book. It's all about how we can slow down and make space for God, all of this kind of stuff we're talking about today. It's a good read. Read it. Does a better job than I'm doing this morning. And she lives a crazy busy life, and so it was really helpful to find out, what was particularly good for her. And for her, it really came down to switching off and plugging into God, dialing down the noise and finding space to process and be with God, not getting buried in her phone when she came home after a kind of heavy shift, and recognizing what in her life was noise. And this is the problem we've got. When I was away, I read a book by Cal Newport called Digital Minimalism. Not a Christian book, but really interesting one about how we can live well with technology. And one of the conflicts that he was trying to resolve was there's been lots of studies into whether social media is good or bad for your mental health. And depending on methodology, they come out with totally opposite results. So some found it's neutral or mildly good. Others found it's horrifically bad for your mental health. And he was trying to synthesize all of this data, trying to figure out what's going on, why these studies were coming to different conclusions. And what he found, which I don't think is the full answer, but I think it's a good chunk of the answer, and I find really interesting, is that simply the act of going on your phone and going on a Facebook or YouTube or Instagram or TikTok or whatever is fairly neutral, actually, for the most part. We know there are some things that are quite damaging to some people, but for the most part, liking a friend's post, scrolling through the feed, not actually a bad thing. The bad thing is that these apps are designed to keep you on them and keep you hooked. And that is where the danger sweeps in, because basically they found the people who are spending more time were the ones with the worst mental health. Like, you could almost track it, like the greater time that people spent on social media, the lower their mental health. And so his theory was, and I like this, that it's not that the thing itself is bad, but that it's pushing out things that are good for us. So spending ages on your phone, you tend to feel a little bit worse after a long session scrolling through your phone rather than good. But having an hour-long face-to-face catch up over coffee with a close friend will leave you feeling really good. And that's good for us and it's nourishing. But your phone is in your pocket And that conversation with a friend needs organizing, arranging, setting up, going out there and doing it. And so we don't do that. And so we miss out on those things that are actually going to nourish us. So rather than foster meaningful relationships, we settle for being very vaguely in contact with what people are doing through social media. Rather than have high quality prayer, we follow a few Christian accounts on Instagram and feel like a few Bible verses and quotes will kind of do us for the day. It's a junk version of actually connecting and spending time with God. Rather than spend time doing the hard work of figuring out what our true vocation is, what kind of work we should actually be doing, what we're gifted at, what we're passionate at, what the world needs, we just go insanely busy. And we keep ourselves busy so that we don't have to think about those difficult, awkward, long questions about life. We don't have to go into that because we kind of get on the treadmill of just getting busy. And it's got a weird reward mechanism, busyness. It kind of makes you feel like you're doing a lot of stuff, and that's really good. But one of the most tragic things we can ever do is to do a lot of things that don't matter. And meaningful work is usually about doing the few things that do actually matter, that are actually important, that we actually should be doing. And so we settle for a junk version of it, and so on and so forth. In all of these aspects, there are junk spirituality, junk living versions, junk food versions of the life that we should be having, that are easy and convenient and at hand, and enjoyable in a quick hit kind of way. But the real versions are slow, mundane, but so much better for us. But they take deliberate planning, deliberate action, and choices, which is where a rhythm of life or a rule of life comes in. And that word rule of life is referring not to rules, as in rule 1, you do this, rule 2, you do this, but what we might call a trellis. So a trellis is a wooden structure that a plant grows up. And basically it's a structure that allows life to grow. So if you leave a vine to grow on the ground, it'll kind of spread out and it won't do too great. Give it a trellis, it'll grow tall, it'll fruit, it'll do really well. And so a rule of life or a deliberate rhythm of life are those things that enable us to live a good life, for us actually to grow. It's the just the right structure for our time of life, our particular temperament, our personality, our gifting, all that, taking all of that into account and going, this is the way I need to live right now. So that does mean, and it's an important point, that if you've got young kids, this is going to look really different as to if you're a single person, or if you're retired. Spare time is going to factor into this. A number of relationships is going to factor into this. Physical health will factor into it. Chronotype, whether you're a morning person or a nighttime person, that's going to factor in. So it's going to be really different for each person. But that said, there are a few kind of headline things that most Christians should be practicing on a regular basis. And they are some kind of study, some kind of time with the Bible, some kind of regular, ideally daily prayer. And again, you don't have to go into massive prayer times every day. If you depending where you're at, start with 10 minutes whenever you can do it. For you, it might be helpful, 10 minutes at a named time, set an alarm on your phone. If you already do that, it can be good to do the hours. Where you do like 3 or 4 times a day, like a regular fixed thing. The daily office, that's the word I'm trying to think of. The daily office, where you do fixed time prayer. That could be good for you, but again, personality wise, that might just be worse for you than free prayer. It might just be a commitment to do prayer at some point every day, and you're more of a free kind of person, and you just need that that freedom to do that. So anyway, there you go. Fasting, we had a good conversation about this on Wednesday night. That has actually been a normal Christian practice for most of Christian history. And so, early days Christians fasted twice a week from sunset to sunset. Think Middle Eastern sunset to sunset. Like our sunset changes time crazy. So basically evening meal to evening meal, 24-hour period. They used to do it twice a day. over time that became twice a week. Over time that became once a week, and still plenty of Christians who do that. You could just skip breakfast or something like that and pray instead. The idea is you replace the eating with prayer, so you don't just not eat. It's a replacement with prayer. So there's that one. Study prayer, and then as we were talking about before, there's it's how you approach work. It's how you approach relationships. And this is a holistic thing. So for you, the spiritual practice that you might need to put in right now is exercise, or eating healthy, or a family meal, or setting aside an hour every week to meet with a good friend and look them in the eye and ask them how they're actually doing, to really connect. It's where you're off kilter right now. And these things are always about replacement. So we take something that's not working, or something we're doing too much of, we cut it out and we put in something good. This is not about doing more. If you do this well, you will find yourself doing less, running around less, being more focused. That's what this is about. Fundamentally, it's about making space. See, some people freak out about this stuff. This having a rule of life or a rhythm of life and having to pray every day. And it sounds very legalistic and very performative, like you have to do all of these things in order to make God happy. But that's not at all what it's about. When I was on holiday and I was experiencing these great prayer times, what I realized was that the most important thing was I was reconnecting with God in a way that I hadn't done for a long time. Like moving past the superficial prayers and requests onto eventually just enjoying hanging out with God. And before that, dealing with some of the deeper angst that was going on in my heart at the time. And, really connecting with God to the point where I could then simply sit and enjoy his presence, which just haven't done in a really long time. And that was the point of it. But without that practice and that space in order to do that, that wouldn't have happened. The point was reconnecting with God. The point was the prayer life, the worship life was out of kilter. It was too weak and it was too low and it was being crowded out by work and busyness. And the point was that I needed to reconnect with God. The way I did that was through prayer, through journaling, through opening up a space to connect with God. But that wasn't the purpose. God is not waiting in heaven for us to die and then goes, how many times did you pray? I've been keeping count, and if you don't do it enough, it's not good enough. Like, God is so much more faithful than we ever dare imagine. And what I mean by that is in pure relational terms, that he sticks with us no matter how unstable and infrequent and messed up we get. Every single time where we go back to him, he is waiting for us to come back to him. And again, this is one of those reasons people set too high a bar for themselves, or if they messed up or if they missed a prayer time, then they think it's all over. But every single time, God is just waiting for us to reconnect with him. And all these practices about, all they are, is making that space to reconnect with God. Reordering our lives back around the God who created the universe again. So all I have for you is a simple question. What's the one thing you feel God is prompting you to do? What's the one practical change you could make? What's the one commitment that you could add that right now would make all the difference? And with that one thing you add, what's the one thing you're going to take away to make space for it? So that you don't become another headless chicken in search of a spiritual life. What's God prompting you with today? What one change could you make? How central is God to your life right now? And what practical change could you make that would bring him back to the center? And honestly, that could be so many things. Like I've said, maybe for you just physically you're not well, and you know that you need to eat better and exercise. And that's a good and godly thing to do. We're supposed to look after the bodies that God gave us. Maybe for you, it's that family meal. You've disconnected from the most important people and you need to set aside time. Maybe there's a friend and you've got a broken relationship and you need to put some time in with them. But I'm guessing for a lot of us, it's going to be down the end of 10 minutes, 15 minutes, 20 minutes every day. Whatever it is, I'm going to set aside, I'm going to be with God. For us as a church, that's why one of the reasons we're doing something like this. We're tracing the Bible front to back through 50 readings, 5 a week. And if you want to join us in that, because community disciplines are definitely one of the things that's up for grabs in this whole idea. We're going to be looking at it together on Zoom on Wednesday nights and hopefully have an in-person group running alongside that as well soon. You can come and grab a book off us. If you would like a book, if you go to our website, storyhouse.community/connect, fill out that form, get in touch, say you would like a book. We'll find a way of getting a book to you. Equally, it's available for free on the Bible app. So if you get the Bible app called YouVersion, go to the reading plans, search for Whole Life, Whole Bible. It's in there. Equally on the LICC website, who make this book, you can sign up for an email and they will email you the reading and the reflection every day. And something like this takes 5-10 minutes every day. But it's just a way to help us reconnect with God. So maybe it's that. But don't try and change everything overnight. That strategy almost always fails. So be sensible in this. Choose the right discipline. Make one powerful change this week that will reorientate your life around God at the center and in the way of Jesus. Before I finish up, let me pray for you if you've decided to make that change. So Jesus, I thank you that you came to give us life to the full, that you said that following you would be a rest for those of us who are burnt out and tired. Thank you that you sent your Holy Spirit to help us make these kind of changes, and you promised even self-control to those who have your Spirit in them. So I pray that you would send your Spirit to prompt me, to prompt all of us with the one change that we can make this week. And as we open up space in our diaries to encounter you, I pray that you would come and meet with us in those spaces, that you would help us with the disciplines and the practices necessary to quieten our minds down, to listen to you and to be guided by you, and to ultimately enjoy your presence and be with you. So for all of my brothers and sisters who decided to make that decision, to make one kind of change, pray that you would help them in that, help them in the discipline, help them in the self-control, but more than anything, Lord, that you would come and meet with them in spirit and in truth. Amen. So, Storyhouse Church, we are now meeting every Sunday morning at 10 o'clock at St. Michael's High School. There is no need to book. We've got tons of room, which just feels lovely after being crammed in the cafe for the last few years. There's lots of space. There's kids' work. There is coffees and teas and donuts and pastries and things when you turn up, so you can have a little breakfast together. So we start at 10 for drinks and food together, just to hang out and to catch up. At 10:30 we start with the worship time. There's a small car park there. If you're walking a distance, do come and walk. And if you can't come physically, we understand there's all kinds of reasons for that. And so we're going to try our darndest to get the streaming working again on a Sunday. No promises for this coming Sunday, because we thought we had it this week and it didn't work out. So we're going to keep trying at that, and hopefully we can get a good quality live stream up and running again very soon. So apologies again for today. We are working at it. We do care about you who can't join with us physically on a Sunday morning. You're very much part of this community. If you want to get in touch for any reason, for example, joining us Wednesday nights, getting hold of a book or whatever, let me bring up the address. It's storyhouse.community/connect. Pop your details in there, and that basically comes as an email into my inbox, and I'll be back in touch with you. So do take care. Thank you for joining me for this last little bit. It's been great to be with you. Hope that message was encouraging and helpful. Join us for this Bible study over this next 10 weeks leading up to Christmas. That's how long you got to get your Christmas presents. Take care, everyone, and hopefully see you soon. Okay.